on the News Channel 5 network. This is Open Line.
Hello everyone, welcome to Open Line. Good show tonight. Talking all about Metro government. Happy to have with us Mayor David Briley and also Codes Director Bill Herbert. Thank you both for being here.
Good to be here.
Mayor, thank you for coming on as you do every month. And you have brought with you, and we are happy to have with you, Bill Herbert, the Codes Director. Is there something going on with Codes, or just an opportunity for people to talk? Or?
Well, I've been doing these community conversations. I've been out and talked to about, I don't know, more than 30 neighborhood associations in the last few weeks. And one of the things that comes up consistently is codes issues, and so just trying to talk through those issues with all these neighborhoods around town. I thought it'd be good for Bill to come along and maybe answer some questions about what we're doing in terms of codes enforcement. Short-term rentals in particular has been a big thing, and with the growth and development of the city, it's a constant part of the conversation about how we're going to balance growth with the neighborhood quality. So Bill's probably the best person in the administration to come talk about that right now.
And so Bill, I'll ask you, and then Mayor, I'm going to have several questions for you. Biggest challenge facing Codes right now? Obviously enormous growth, but you talk about short-term rentals. What's the biggest challenge?
The biggest daily challenge is the short-term rental. It's probably the most difficult program to administer that perhaps our department has ever encountered. There are daily issues, there are administration issues, there's legal issues, there's enforcement issues, and we seem to kind of be in charge of most of that. It's been a challenge.
And you're talking about Airbnbs and that kind of thing.
Airbnbs, VRBO, and all the other platforms that do the same thing.
All right, so we'll talk about that. Mayor, I want to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
Yesterday there was a $30 million lawsuit filed against Metro and a police officer, Andrew Delkey. It was filed by Daniel Hambrick's family, who was shot and killed by Delkey last year. The lawsuit says there is a culture of fear and violence and racism in the police department. Some of that language. What's your reaction to the lawsuit and specifically some of that language?
Well, you know, I'm a recovering lawyer, so I'd love to really get into the weeds with you and talk about all that. But since it's pending litigation, I'm going to leave our response to the lawsuit to the lawyers right now. I guess all I will say about it is that it's obviously a tragic event, and we're going to let the court process run its course.
The lawsuit would seem to indicate there are those in our community that feel like the police department has been dismissive of evidence of systematic racial discrimination. So let's say you're not talking about the lawsuit. Let's say there's someone out there who feels like the police department has been dismissive of, and Metro, of that kind of thing. What do you say? Do you think the city, Metro, has been dismissive of that kind of thing?
Well, I would agree with your assessment that there are folks in town who feel that way. I think that's why the Community Oversight Board got created. And so we're working hard to make sure that the Community Oversight Board is successful. And so we started working on November 7th to get it staffed and get it up and running, and we've got 11 good people who are going to have a chance to help the city look at policing and do a more objective assessment of how folks do feel about how we're policing and make some recommendations to the police department. So without challenging anybody's personal assessment about policing or really about our police. I mean, they have a hard job. I don't really want to get into the position of undermining them by looking at sort of the anecdotal evidence. I mean, I think we got to look at it objectively. That's what the COB is going to do, and if there's work that needs to be done to improve the police department, we'll do it.
There's been some talk about morale in the police department lately, that there have been officers leaving the department and going to surrounding neighboring departments. In other words, not retiring, they're just going to other departments. Are you concerned about low morale? Are you concerned that there is a staffing, we're 108 officers at least short of full employment? Are you concerned about it? What do you think can be done about it?
Sure, I'm very much concerned about it, and I've talked to the chief here quite recently about what we're going to do to try and address it. And so some things we're looking at in the context of the budget to try and make it easier for us to recruit, looking at maybe some new techniques to go out and recruit. And I don't think this is typically a Nashville problem. It is a big city problem that cities across the country where cost of living is going up, where there's very low unemployment, and where it's a more controversial job than it's ever been before. I think cities are generally struggling in many respects to hire officers right now. So I'm committed with the chief to get us up to full employment as quickly as we possibly can. And I know part of that is compensation. So we're working to try and figure that out here in the near future and make some progress on that.
When they say they don't feel supported, part of that is compensation. Sure. All Metro employees were promised a 3% raise. Last year, cost of living increase, it didn't happen. Do you feel like it's going to happen this year? As you work on this budget, what do you think?
Well, when I was sworn in on March 6th, I faced a budget that was complicated, let's say, and a lot of decisions had been made, not just in the prior 2 years, but many years before, that made it more complicated. And we can have we'll come back and talk just about the budget at one point in time. And so I felt like last year it was important in that moment of flux in the city for us to live within our means, not raise taxes, and prove to folks that we could do that, because I think it was important to build trust in the government in that respect. Unfortunately, that meant we didn't have the money for the cost of living adjustment for our Metro employees, although about 70% of our employees did get a raise of some sort last year through a step or an open range increase. And so starting let's say in July, within just a few weeks of last year's budget being adopted, I started working hard with the finance department to look at all our expenses and make sure we were not spending money where we didn't need to. And we built in that anticipated savings number that I think y'all have reported on a little bit, which has certainly been difficult for some departments to figure out. But I think it's an important part of governing. You make departments go look at how they're spending money and make sure they're spending it as wisely as possible. And that's what the anticipated savings was. We didn't cut line items. We said, hey, we need to save this amount of money. You guys go figure it out and do it as effectively as you possibly can. This year, having worked with the finance director really closely over the last few months, and even sort of down to every 2 or 3 days we meet now to talk about it, all I can say is that I'm optimistic and that a decision will be coming soon.
You're optimistic that you'll be able to provide a pay raise in the next budget?
I'm optimistic, but I haven't made a final decision yet because we don't have the final numbers yet.
Have you made a final decision? Will you have a property tax increase?
I will not be presenting a property tax increase to the council this year.
And that's very interesting. How might you come up with the money for because we've talked about in the past that there are other things that are increasing, our deficit and that kind of thing, or spending on debt and that kind of thing. So what about, how might you come up with money for a pay increase? Right,
so before the 2019 budget that we're in right now, we had increases of about $100 or $120 million in most of the budgets in the prior 2 years. And with that kind of growth of $100, $120 million, you can fund the pay raises. And I think that's when Mayor Berry presented a 3-year pay plan. She sort of thought that would continue. Last year, we had some things that happened that won't happen again this year. We set the property tax rate too low. And we assumed fewer successful appeals, and we assumed the state would set the utilities rate at a level, and they set it or they would have increases in value of utilities, and it ended up being lower increases in the value of utilities. We lost $15 million from the state in terms of schools funding last year. I think there was a hope that General Hospital would not need their full amount of funding last year. And then we had an increase in debt service last year. So we had 5 things last year that created the problem. This year we have 1 of them. The only thing we think we're going to have this year is an increase in debt service. So, so we are working hard with growth in revenue, which we will have both this year and next year, and we're trying to get those numbers to add up so that we can both do a cost of living adjustment and live within our means. And all I can say at this point is that I get more optimistic about that over time, and we'll be announcing something in the very near future.
Anything to do with the Convention Center Authority? That's something the Convention Center is it takes money from a portion of downtown to pay for the convention center. That's certainly something where there's been a surplus. They don't want that to go down if times get tougher. But is that possibly part of what you're thinking about here?
So last year, the Convention Center Authority approved $10 million in a transfer from their reserve fund to the general fund to operate the government, and they did the same thing again last week, I think it was. So we'll continue to have that $10 million. Now, they are going to have needs going forward, not just to pay their debt, but also to do retrofits and improvements to the existing facility there. So they have to maintain some sort of reserve for that purpose. Additionally, a lot of the money that is accumulating over there is state money, and so we have to be careful about that. And the bond covenants, I don't mean to get too far in the weeds here, too lawyerly, but we have certain obligations to the bondholders to maintain a reserve there as well. So there are limits on how we can spend that money.
And just two other questions.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so there's been a lot of controversy surrounding metro schools. They're going to come and ask for money to fully fund their budget. With the controversy that's been going on, does that impact, do you believe, the money that council will approve or that you will recommend? What role does that controversy play in the money that they will eventually get?
Well, I mean, I think that if there was some way for me to send less money and for the school board and Dr. Joseph to get along better and work more cooperatively, I would do it, right? But withholding money is just going to hurt the kids and the teachers. So we're not going to do anything to withhold money to try and leverage the school board or Dr. Joseph to operate in a different fashion. We're doing our best to get them enough money so that they're capable of fulfilling their mission and working on providing the highest possible education to children. So I talked to school board members a fair amount. I talked to Dr. Joseph a fair amount. And I guess my challenge to them always is to focus as much as they possibly can on the kids and as little as they possibly can on sort of the extraneous stuff to what's happening in our classrooms.
So lastly, and then we'll go to calls and everything else. We've had a lot of rain lately. We have the NFL draft coming up. Riverfront Park is underwater for part of it. Is there some concern that if there's a lot of rain here in the next several days that it could impact the NFL draft? And what do we do if Riverfront Park is still submerged as the draft comes around?
I'm not on a day-to-day basis talking to the NFL. We do have staff members who are, and they feel confident that they're going to be able to work through it. I did get an email from the Corps of Engineers today, and they're going to start drawing down the Cumberland here in the next few days. And the rain patterns predicted over the next few weeks should let them bring it down much more. One of the reasons it's been so high for the last few weeks has nothing to do with Nashville. It has to do with Lake Cumberland up above the Wolf Creek Dam. And so they had gotten up over 80%, close to 90% of their total storage capacity. And now they're down to about 50% of their storage capacity. And every day they're reducing the amount of water they're sending through the dam there. So we should see the water come down there. We're confident that the NFL will be able to get their infrastructure there in place, which is going to be pretty significant. People ought to know. And so I do worry about the fact that we're starting to see more and more persistent high water in the Cumberland downtown, and it's a conversation we're going to have to sort of circle back and have again about the core of the city and protecting it from floods.
That kind of sets the table for our discussion. Right. Now we'll open it up, and Bill will ask Codes questions and everything. So we'll take a break. If you have questions for the mayor or for Codes, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.